everybody. We're here at AMC Huebner Theater with Bob.
I'm here.
Hi, Bob. And you had a great idea. We were talking the other day, and you decided, hey, Dora, why don't we do something on the stage? You know, there's this brand new movie opening at the IMAX called Alaska, and there are so many great movies that are made that have states' names. And so I said, sure, let's do it. And of course,
most of them that have states' names are in the Old West. Did you know that?
Yeah. But you know what?
What?
The whole idea of the genre of the Western has always held such, I don't know, such intrigue for people who were from the North and tenderfoots, and, you know, so they actually chose, and the ones we're going to do today are Texas, California, Arizona, Montana, and Alaska. And the only one that's not a Western is Alaska.
That's right. And yet, you know, it could be considered with Western elements because you have a real bad guy and a real good guy, and you have a rescue, and it's got a lot of action. So, but the movies that were made in Texas, for example, presented the only cultural advantage that America has over other countries. We're a hodgepodge of cultures. The only thing that we offered the rest of the world, that only we had, was the Western frontier. That's all. And Texas represents it so beautifully. So just by saying Texas on the screen, you know you're going to see an epic Western.
I think that, you know, it's synonymous. You know, the name, the word Texas with cowboys, with that whole iconography.
Wait a minute,
and
with
actually,
Glenn Ford and with William Holden.
There you go. You know, the
As
funny
cowboys.
thing is that, you know, the Western that really became, that created the iconography was actually not even filmed in John Ford's Westerns were filmed many times in Monument Valley.
In Utah.
And yeah, and so the funny thing is that all that iconography that people associate with the beginning of the Western wasn't even filmed here, but we get the credit nonetheless. So the first one is, the title is Texas.
And that tells you everything you need to know, since it has Glenn Ford and William Holden establishing their role in movie Westerns. They made a lot of them after that. And Claire Trevor, who was the heroine in Stagecoach. You have a bona fide word picture of what the movie is all about. It doesn't even have to have a different kind of plot. It could be just like The Virginian, only it takes place in Texas, and it means more because Texas is bigger, right?
When roughly did this come out?
Around 1940.
1940. Did it do well? Did it do, I'm sure it did well in Texas. Did
No,
it do well
did
nationally?
If it hadn't, Glenn Ford and William Holden wouldn't have continued to make Westerns.
Yeah, that's true.
And they did continue to, and as a matter of fact, some of the Westerns that they made were filmed in Texas. Streets of Laredo was, and that had William Holden in it. And of course, a lot of the Western type adventures were in the west part of Texas and the south part in San Antonio. There was a Western called Dallas and one called Fort Worth, and they didn't do so well.
Oh my goodness.
But Texas did, because that took in everything.
Right. And I think also that people from other states who are intrigued by this whole notion of the cowboy and whatever. Really, I'm raised in New York State, and I have to say that if you said Texas to me as a kid, I'd say cowboys to you. Do you know what I mean?
That's right, and that's the way
More
they
than any
sold the
other
movie.
state.
That's the way they sold the movie.
So it
and
did
it
quite
worked.
well.
It clicked. It clicked. Yes, it did.
My favorite Texan movie is Giant. As I've told you before, it's such a great movie, and I think that he captured something about the
It does
state.
capture something about modern day Texas, not the Old West, even though it takes place on the frontier.
But I think that, you know, in capturing something about modern day meaning the 50s Texas when it was filmed, I think he also captured something of the spirits that came before in the character of Rock Hudson, who was a Texan through and through, born and bred, many generations, had owned that ranch, etc. Born and bred Texan. I think he really captured something.
You know, it was based or inspired by the King Ranch in Texas, by the Kleberg family in Texas. So actually it has a Texas foundation on the old frontier, you might say.
The next one is another state that we sometimes associate with cowboys, but not always, and it's California, and this one too is a Western, you've told me.
Well, it's a Western, but it's a more romantic Western. Now, they all have romance. They all have a leading lady and a leading man, but this had Barbara Stanwyck, and she could very often just control the whole movie herself. And she plays a frontierswoman, and she made a lot of Westerns after that. California was a beautifully photographed Western, and it had the Spanish influence more than the Mexican that we have here. And the Spanish influence conjures up a more romantic picture because it's old world, not in the Americas. Just like Marco Zorro, because he was from Spain. But this movie had Barbara Stanwyck, and I thought that it was really one of the more, I think maybe it competes with Texas as two of the best word picture westerns that we have.
Really?
But
What
there are
about
others.
that Barbara Stanwyck, though? I mean, she can do the sophisticated, the Lady Eve, and this kind of stuff.
Comedies.
And then she can do this. And a lot of actresses that, you know, didn't get to. She did a quite. We just a couple weeks ago we did Stella Dallas. I mean, what a breath. You know.
Yeah, oh yeah, she had an enormous range. She was also in a long-running TV series that was a western too.
Yes, I remember. She played the matriarch of the family.
That's right. And she was a pushy broad, pardon my language, but she was.
Okay, the next one is a state that we also many times associate with at least a western kind of a mindset, and that's Arizona.
I know, but you know, the emphasis is a little different because we think of Arizona as Native Americans more than a Mexican or a Spanish influence. It's still a frontier state, and the Native Americans are not the main characters, but their influence, their culture is part of the picture. Arizona did something for the movie Western no other state has really done. Even Texas has done something, but not to that extent. They filmed it, they built a set, a sound stage, and they called it Old Tucson. And that, after the movie was filmed there, they opened it up as a tourist attraction.
Oh,
and
really?
it still exists, yes. Old Tucson.
Is it still called Old Tucson?
Old Tucson in Arizona. It still exists. I've been there. I've seen it.
Wow.
And was the set that they filmed the movie Arizona, which also had William Holden, by the way. And then I had Jean Arthur, whose only other
Jean Arthur.
Yeah, she was basically a comedian, but she was in The Plainsman, which is a western about Wild Bill Hickok. She was also in Shane as Alan Ladd.
That's right.
So, but this was a western with her, and the movie Arizona makes. What does it make you think of? Would you think about American Indians or not?
To a degree, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would.
So we have the robust rebel of Texas, with the Mexican influence in our culture here. We have the romantic westerns in California with the Spanish influence, and we have the Independence Day westerns of Arizona with the American Indian influence. And then there's another one, Montana, up in the north. But there was a movie called Montana, which conjures up a picture of the Old West, and yet it had Australian accented Errol Flynn in the lead. And he made several westerns, Dodge City, Virginia City, San Antonio that we talked about recently.
And he didn't lose his accent?
No, he didn't lose his accent. It didn't matter because he was an action hero. Montana meant action. It didn't make any difference if the plot was the same as San Antonio or any other western that he made. He made Santa Fe Trail, and they died with their boots on, and quite a few of them.
You know what I think the western kind of acted as for the audience in those days, and that's why people could get away with like Australian accents in Montana, that kind of thing, or certain other things being off, is that the western was to the audiences of the 30s, 40s, and to a degree the 50s, what action is for us today. Action / sci-fi.
Well,
sci-fi.
they were action. We have violence today. These other movies in the past had action,
true.
and there's a big difference.
Well, you know, there are a few, very few out there, action movies today that aren't quite as violent and that are just about action. Entrapment probably is a good example. There's not a lot of violence in Entrapment, but there are a lot of thrills for people.
Suspense.
Yes, exactly.
It makes your
I
palms
think
sweat.
that that's the same kind of elixir. You know, that what we get out of those kinds of movies today that audiences did. You know, it's thrills and that kind of thing, and taking you into a world that's not yours.
That's true.
You know, to study the characters.
Well, that's one reason why they used to use the states to pick the states' names, because they all had reputations.
Yeah.
There were others. The Virginian. That isn't Virginia, but the Virginian was about the Old West.
You were telling me, I was saying, New York didn't get one, and you said New York, and I said, that's a comedy, a musical, Bob, and you said, so what?
So is Oklahoma, is what I said.
That's
Okay, and that conjures up a picture too. But you know, there was another big center of culture that was exposed in the movies through the states, and none of them are on video, unfortunately. There was a movie called Kentucky, there was one called Maryland, there was one called Virginia,
kidding.
and they were all about the horse racing sport, the sport of horse racing, because that was so popular. There was also a movie called Mississippi, which is all about con men on the riverboats, had W.C. Fields and Bing Crosby in it.
Oh, wow.
But you have got states.
What about Florida?
I don't think Florida has any.
Because Florida is a really popular state in terms of tourism and that kind of thing. I wonder that people might not want.
Well, but when
Well,
these other
Moon over
mo-
Miami, that kind of stuff.
Oh, that was. But you see, that's so dated because the skyline of Miami has changed so much
completely.
since that movie was made, 1941. But back in the 30s and 40s, when these movies were first evolved, the Western culture was really the biggest thing. the sport, horse racing, was something else. It was also indicative of that era and that and that area. But it wasn't, you could see horse racing in other countries too. The Western, the old-fashioned shoot 'em ups, Texas, Arizona, California, Montana, and Alaska. It was a frontier state at one time.
Interesting. What other, I think that places like New York, when you have a comedy, or what other things in New York? Let's go to my home state for a little bit. We've got New York, but there's other stuff too.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Well, you know, the gangster thing you think of when you think of shameful. New York and Chicago.
Chicago more primarily, though.
You think so?
'Cause Al Capone was from Chicago, wasn't he? And there were 3 or 4 movies based on his career. I think Chicago is more known for the gangster element. New York has sophistication that Chicago doesn't. And I would think of the sophisticated life.
Like?
Huh?
Like? Movies like?
Well, you remember You Can't Take It With You?
Yeah.
Okay, and you remember the nightlife that she and her family really enjoy? They go to nightclubs. You remember the movie called The Stork Club?
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and you remember the biography of Texas Ghana called Incendiary Blonde? About she was queen of the nightclubs.
No.
Eddie Hutton starred. Queen of the night. You know who Texas Guinan was?
No.
You don't know who Texas Guinan was?
No.
Well, Texas Guinan is a real live woman at one time. She died.
Texas Guinan?
No, Texas Guinan, because she was from Texas, but she had her own saloons, and she had them mostly, they were clubs in New York, and her catchphrase was, "Hello, suckers." Did you ever hear that?
Yes, I have.
That's Texas Guinan, is the one who said it.
Really? Had to come from Texas.
That's right. Oh, now you have other things in New York too, boast
well,
about.
I think there's some recent, the Cotton Club, those kinds of things. They're
Cotton
definitely
Club.
New
that was
York
a nightclub.
incarnations.
Oh yeah. And also you had Hester Street, which is down in the.
Yes, it's a wonderful little gem of a movie.
And you have movies that are based in Little Italy.
Yeah.
And you have things in Greenwich Village. And you have something around Brooklyn. Brooklyn is a center of movie activity and conjures up a certain kind of image, especially when the Dodgers were there.
Yeah.
So every part of the country has its own, but the Western frontier was unique to America.
Yeah, absolutely. It is America's genre.
It is America, and we have the movies to prove it.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Bob, we are going to talk, we have about a minute left, but we're going to talk when we come back and next week as well about a brand new movie that's opening up at the IMAX called Alaska, and that was what precipitated us doing this whole state.
And that is really a tour of it. It is a documentary at the IMAX, it usually is. But there was a movie called Alaska with Charlton Heston as the bad guy. Even before he became president of the NRA. I mean, he was fooling around with guns a long time ago. But this is all about 2 young kids trying to find their father whose plane had crashed in the mountains, icy mountains of Alaska, and Charlton Heston is thinking there might be some money involved, that he's trying to trap them so he can get the treasure, and he uses guns just like an NRA fanatic.
Interesting.
Wonder why. Why did I say that? Oh, gosh.
We'll be right back to talk about the new Alaska that's coming out and a few other movies that are in the theaters right now.
Okay.
On CTSA, we have Mass Sign Language the first Tuesday of every month, 9:30 in the morning and again 6 o'clock at night. Every Sunday, we have interpreted Masses throughout the city.
Welcome back, and we're talking about movies that are in the theaters right now, and one that's at the IMAX that we kind of alluded to last time, and the whole reason that we did this states movies in the first part was a brand new movie coming to the IMAX on Alaska, which we're going to talk about just a little this week, but more next week.
Well, this week we just say that it's coming because it is a fascinating tour. When you go to the IMAX theater, that screen is 6 stories high. Alaska is now the biggest state in the country. Texas used to have that honor, but Alaska is bigger. And you will see the width and the breadth and the height and everything else on that giant size screen. You can just picture what it must be like just from that title, like we were talking about. And I'm eager to see what they show us about Alaska. You know, I've been up there. Have you ever been up there?
Never.
Well, they have whales and polar bears and everything
See, I don't
else
think I
up
could
there.
stand it. I am so acclimated now.
Yeah.
Having come from the cold, I'm so acclimated to the
You
heat
see
now.
it from
I
a
could,
cruise ship, so you can lean back and have a drink while you're watching those whales.
wrapped, swathed in wool. Let me tell you, I can't stand the cold anymore.
You go there in the summer, it's not cold.
Really? Is
Yeah.
it nice? People have told me.
It's beautiful and it's warm. You don't have to worry. You can't go up there in the middle of the winter because everybody is snowed in. They close up most of the small towns that the cruise ship stop at.
You know something that struck me? Alaska is the only state that we have at this point, besides maybe to a degree Hawaii, but I think the Elvis Presley movies made mincemeat of us not knowing what Hawaii is. Alaska is the state. We were discussing in the last section all the states like Texas and California that had a mystique to people who didn't live there. Well, Alaska is our only one left that has mystique, because I would venture to say that most Americans are like me and not you, have not gone to Alaska. And so to be able to see this state, to get a glimpse of this state, almost as if you could walk through that screen so large, it's probably going to be a wonderful thing. So.
Oh, yes, I would imagine. Now, does Tea with Mussolini make you want to go back to the Mussolini era and see Italy in those days?
Not in those days. Italy is a country that I definitely have reserved for, God willing, I get to go there one day, because the artwork alone is something that I want to see
Well,
in
the
the
artwork is what it's
flesh.
famous for, and it
But
is beautiful.
Mussolini was quite
Mussolini tried to repress art, and that's what this movie is really all about. It's a true story. It's based on Franco Zeffirelli's life. He was a youngster when the movie opens.
Wait, let's tell the audience that beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Shakespearean Romeo and Juliet was created by Zeffirelli. He's just a
he did the
beautiful
very
filmmaker.
first version. He didn't create the show, Shakespeare did.
Right,
but, I mean,
but the film.
but he did the very first stage production and film production with an actress who was closest to the age that the character was supposed to be.
Yes.
He cast Judi Dench, who's now in her 60s, and she just got an Oscar for playing Queen Elizabeth in Shakespeare in Love, as Juliet when she was 23 years old. And I had a chance to talk to Zeffirelli, and he says that the stage show bombed in Britain because they weren't used to seeing young people playing these parts. They thought they'd see stately character actresses. And that Kenneth Tynan wrote that it took an Italian to show us how to interpret Shakespeare. This is not just a revelation, it could be a revolution. And so that was in 1960. 8 years later, Zeffirelli did the movie version of Romeo and Juliet and used Olivia Hussey, who was about 22. And it made more people aware of Shakespeare, more people appreciate Shakespeare, especially Romeo and Juliet.
And she looked, even though she was 22, she looked 15 or 16. She looked like a baby.
She still does.
Really? Does she?
She
I haven't
still
seen her.
does.
I haven't seen her anything. But in any case, Tea with Mussolini. Give us a little bit of a. You know, you have no idea what this plot's going to be about. Now we're talking about. It is actually a little autobiographical.
Well, it's based on his autobiography, but it's just one section of his autobiography because it tells of the time when he was about 8 years old, 8 to 10 years old. His mother dies. He was an illegitimate son. His biological father refuses any responsibilities, married to someone else. He's all on his own. And 5 very, very eccentric women who knew his mother get together to raise him. One of them is Judi Dench. Another is the marvelous Maggie Smith, who was just terrific to hear and listen to. Joan Plowright, Cher as an American art aficionado, and Lily Tomlin as a very, very masculine.
What a cast
And
to
they raise
assemble.
him, and he wants part of the art world. Just as his mother dies, Mussolini is rising to power. And Mussolini actually repressed artistic expression.
Yes.
So these women worked with him.
As did many dictators.
Yes,
As
they
did
usually
Hitler.
do. Because that expresses your emotions, they don't want individuality.
Right.
But you know, these women helped him get a place for himself in the art world, mainly in Britain, which is where he started. Today, he spends most of his time with opera. He's made movies, he's staged and produced and directed stage shows. He directed the European premieres of many of our classic plays, including Tennessee Williams' Streetcar Named Desire and A Delicate Balance by Edward Albee. He has directed all of these women that are in his movie on stage. He also directed Laurence Olivier. and John Gielgud, and many very noteworthy actors. He had a personal relationship with all because they became good friends. That's why he hired these actresses, because he knew them all. So he says. And this movie shows how their appreciation of different facets of the arts helped form Zeffirelli's life and gave him a start in life. That's what the movie's about.
Incredible.
It's weak tea as far as Zeffirelli is concerned, but it sure is a strong, stiff drink when it talks about eccentric women, because they dominate the screen.
Really, this is a strong cast, and you liked it?
Yeah, I did.
Good.
Yeah, I did.
Good. Also, we want to talk a little bit about some movies that have kind of been, you know, done before, but let's see if they have a little more snap. Another Shakespearean play that is being brought to the screen.
Midsummer
and boy,
Night's
does it
Dream.
look beautiful.
It does. Have you ever seen it done before in the movies?
I've seen the old version
With
with
Mickey Rooney as
yes,
Puck? Okay,
yes.
that's the big one. It came out in 1935.
Right.
There have been several ballet versions since, but this one is more of the story, just like the 1935 version. And this one has a cast to die for. Kevin Kline is Bottom with the donkey ears.
Yes, I saw. We've seen him in the
Stanley
the
Tucci
previews.
as Puck with horns, and he says, "What fools these mortals be." Okay.
Yes.
Michelle Pfeiffer and
Boy,
Callista
does she not
Flockhart.
look luminous in
Oh, she
every,
always does.
doesn't,
Oh, she's
but
good.
especially now that she's got the magical thing going on in this movie, they have really, really made her
Well,
look
you know
just
something?
beautiful.
This movie is rated PG-13.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why, really, but I do know that Midsummer Night's Dream is performed in high school all the time. So it couldn't be really the story or the language, although they updated it a couple of centuries. It doesn't take place when
Right.
So they may have some form of nudity, or maybe they say, oh, fudge or something, I don't know. But anyway, it's PG-13.
Okay. And Callista Flockhart, you were giving, when I interrupted you, were giving a list of the various
The
people who...
TV queen, that's right. That opens up this week as well.
Well, she has that waif-like beauty that she's
That
not as
suits-
beautiful as Michelle Pfeiffer, but she has that waif-like
That suits
look.
a Shakespearean play.
Yeah, and I think this one in particular. I can't wait to see this one. We're going to see this one this week. It opens this weekend, everybody should know, because this looks like a real magical and beautiful romp.
It's supposed to be, and I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
One that has been in the theaters that's doing quite well, that we mentioned when we talked about action and adventure, is Entrapment.
Entrapment, and this is a PG-13 movie. Lots of suspense,
Yeah.
nail-biting
Yeah.
suspense, but no real violence.
No,
All the violence takes
nothing
place
gory,
off camera.
nothing gory.
And
It's
the
a-
people have been complaining, especially a lot of the young people, oh, Sean Connery's too old. You know what this movie says to me?
I heard that too.
But you know what the movie says to me? It shows that his charm is ageless.
Yeah.
Because he can still cut it.
Yeah.
He's good.
Yeah, he is, and I think that we're getting quite a backlash, and deservedly so. Do you remember the cover of People magazine? I think it was about a year
Sexiest
ago.
man alive.
No, not that, but well, that too. But we're getting some backlash now, I think, from women who are saying, "Look, we resent this." You know, we do know that. Look at people like Jane Fonda, who refuse to act anymore because there just aren't any roles for her. You know, the roles begin to dwindle for women, and yet we have men of comparable age. Remember the big controversy when they were getting ready to do the sequel to Chinatown, and Faye Dunaway, who had played the lead opposite Jack Nicholson in the first version, was offered, and I think she refused, a lesser part as the mother of the woman who was going to play opposite. It was some big controversy that took place, and it brought this issue to the fore that, you know.
Faye Dunaway, who is a very, very fine actress, really has not had a good role in many years.
And she's a fine actress.
She is a fine
Yeah.
actress. But it's, you know, it's always been that way in show business. And I think one reason why the male characters are built up and the female characters are discarded after a certain age is because virtually all of the major writers and producers are men. If you had more women doing them, they would be the other way around.
Well, you know, take a look at France, a country that has worshipped Jean Moreau for, I mean, into her old age. She has literally not been lacking for parts through her entire life. She was worshipped by the French. It's just, I think that we have I don't know if it's our beach thing or what it is, but we have this culture of youth here more than probably any other country.
Well, I think that the media helps foster that idea because...
Absolutely, Bob.
And I think that...
And movies play a big part in that.
They do. And you can't really compare French wisdom, it's an ancient country, with America's know-how because we're just learning we learn how to make money before we learn much about people. And I think it's the other way around in a lot of the European countries.
I think I have to agree with you. But I do think that some of the women writers who are bringing this whole issue to the fore, it was People magazine that, getting back to what I was saying earlier, it was People magazine that ran an issue with 4, I think at the time Harrison Ford's movie with Anne Hecht had come out, and there were Hetch. Also, Michael Douglas had come out playing opposite Gwyneth Paltrow, and they were saying, "What's wrong with this picture, folks?" And it's an issue that needs to be explored.
You know what's wrong with those pictures? Lousy scripts. That's what was wrong with those pictures.
I want to talk about a movie that you want to talk about, and I'm going to jump to something called Hideous Kinky, which I haven't seen and you have.
I have seen it. It's not hideous at all. It's gorgeously photographed in Morocco. You see all of Marrakesh. But it's kinky as can be. The characters are off the wall weird. Kate Winslet from Titanic plays a free spirit. She's a mother of 2 young daughters. She leaves her husband in their native London so she can have a life of complete abandonment in Morocco, and she wants her kids to follow in her footsteps, and they think she's weird too. Now she takes up with a Moroccan who is a street performer who is married, but they take up together, and the highlight of their scene is a nude swimming scene, which gives her a chance to bear her all, just like she did in one scene in Titanic. Well, not her all, because the shadows get in the way, I think, this time. But anyway, the movie is kinky, and it's all about a character that is very, very difficult to identify with. She's more like the hippie of the early 60s, yet she is not hip, because she has 2 kids and responsibilities that she does not take seriously. And I understand the book was quite good. It's written by Esther Freud, the great-granddaughter of Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund was probably spinning in his grave if he was able to see this movie, because they never explain that. And they never explain the Freudian influence that must have influenced the young girls, otherwise they wouldn't have written about it. But that's not part of the movie. So
we were left without justification for acts in the movie that we don't understand.
You don't have justification of the characters. None of the motivation is explained. It's just an excuse for Kate Winslet to play an arty type waif. And the movie itself has a title that's going to attract people. Says, "What do you mean by hideous kinky?" Well, let me tell you right now, it doesn't mean a thing. It doesn't mean a thing.
Well, we're going to leave everybody because we're just about out of time, but we're going to let everybody know that guess what? We are on next week when Star Wars opens. So next week we're going to devote practically the whole show, top and bottom, to Star Wars.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll
See you
be
next
here.
week.